Jackie, can you talk about Herman's condition at this point?
Yeah, good morning, Amy. Herman is taking a turn for the worse. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from one of the other supporters who said, you should come in. The doctors aren't sure if his kidneys are also failing, as well as his liver. So I've been with him since 3. He's able to speak a word, like if you move him around, he'll yell or indicate that he's uncomfortable, but he doesn't seem to be cognizant in any other way. Yeah, it's a really intense time right now, and it's myself and a few other long-term supporters and his sister that are bedside with him.
Jackie, did he understand yesterday at the prison that he was being released?
You'd have to ask George and King whether or not he understood it at the prison. I know that he did understand it last night when we had about 100 supporters cheering him on, welcoming him home with banners and signs chanting "Power to the People." He was very cognizant then. You know, this turn for the worse happened, like I said, at about 2:30, 3 o'clock this morning.
Let's turn to Robert King, another member of the Angola Three. Robert King is free after 29 years. Albert Woodfox remains in prison. And, of course, as we said, Herman Wallace, in a complete surprise move of a federal judge, had his conviction overturned yesterday with a demand for his immediate release, which happened last night. Robert King, you were in prison with Herman Wallace, visiting him to say your final goodbye as he lay dying of liver cancer. You delivered the news to him about the overturning of his conviction. How did Herman respond?
Thank you, Amy. Straight to the point. Yes, of course, when we brought the news to Herman that he was being released, we had to do it in part, in bits and pieces. We only learned on our way to the prison from George Kendall, the head attorney, that Herman's case had been overturned. And so we were a bit surprised, but we had some good news for him. And when I saw him, I saw, as Jackie indicated, he's pretty bad. He's in pretty bad shape. His body is failing him. But I was there, Amy, you know, not so much as to witness his death, but as you said, also try to encourage him to hold on and to try to get him to recognize that his supporters, lawyers and all included, were on board in trying to get him released from prison. And when we heard about this, we told him, and I think we managed to penetrate, we managed to penetrate and get to him the point that he would probably be released or could be released. I remember the lawyer on the way out telling Herman to hold on, and his word, which were the best words of the day, he said, "I will hold on. I'll hold on, I'm gonna hold on." And it was pretty touching, and I do feel this, Amy, that he will hold on despite the fact that his body has failed and is failing him. I still believe in miracles, and I believe we can perform miracles. People can perform miracles, and there are doctors among us who can perform miracles to deal with situations such as this. And hopefully this is one of those times. Hopefully it is not too late. And but in any case, Herman, whatever happened or whatever transpires, Herman will know one thing. I think he recognizes this, and he understood this and understand that there are many people, millions of people who really love him and who support him. And they are by his side, and he feels that he has contributed in some way to the struggle, regardless of what happened. If Herman survived, he will continue to struggle. But if not, then his millions and legions of supporters around the world are on board to continue the struggle. But it's because it's not just a fight to have him released from prison, but to have his conviction overturned and to deal with so many other. And we have Albert Woodfox to consider as well. He is still on board, and he is suffering just as much as Herman. He will now be the longest serving prisoner in solitary confinement. So we have to deal with him. We have to contend with all the rest of the stuff that is going on regarding prison, the members of our society. We have to think about them as well. But
Robert,
Herman,
he was with you.
Would be okay.
Robert, he was with you yesterday. Albert Woodfox. I mean, this is an unusual, to say the least, gathering. You would never have been allowed to visit Herman Wallace, and of course, Albert Woodfox wouldn't either, as he remains in prison. But it was the final goodbye. What was Albert Woodfox's words for Herman Wallace in that prison cell, in the prison where you were with him? In the hospital there.
Well, yes, thank you. Albert's last word was, Herman, we love you, and you're going to get out here today. We're trying to get you out. The lawyers will have you out today. And it was his last word, and he kissed him on the forehead. But prior to that time, he had been encouraging him and that, to hold on, and that he will be free, and that there are people working for him, and that he won't be forgotten in any way.
Was he shackled?
Albert Woodfox was very much shackled and handcuffed. He had the usual traditional belt on, chain with the belt, the locks, and so forth and so on. And it was difficult for him to eat his meal. He was having problems, and we had to help him to eat because he could not hold the tray in which the food, that held the food.
George Kendall, you're Herman Wallace's attorney. How did this happen?
The courts, there are many tragedies in this case, and one of them is that the state judiciary in Louisiana knew for a long time that this trial was very unfair, but just refused to grant a new trial decades ago. When Judge Jackson finally took a look at this case, I think he concluded pretty quickly, this is unfair and I have to overturn it, and to his great credit, he did so. Herman wrote to the judge after he learned that he was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer and said, I've fought for 40 years to receive a new trial. Please don't let me die before I hear from you. We filed a bail motion. A lot of federal judges don't know this. They have the power to grant bail in these habeas proceedings. It's rarely used. And Judge Jackson said, I'm not going to grant bail now, but I will decide this case without delay. Of course, we would have liked him to decide this quicker, but when he decided the case, he made it very clear two things. The first trial was unfair, violated the Constitution, Mr. Wallace was right, and that he needed to be released today. And unfortunately, it took state officials hours to comply with that. In fact, Judge Jackson had to issue a second order at 6 p.m. last night. And it was only, I think, because the prison knew that Judge Jackson was not playing. And we had an ambulance at the gate.
The warden had gone out to dinner and said he would not be returning to release Herman
The warden
Wallace.
said at 2:30 that he was not going to release him. And the judge then issued a second order at 6 p.m. that said, I meant what I said. He is to be released immediately.
So I want to read from U.S. District Judge Brian A. Jackson's order that led to Herman Wallace's release Tuesday. He wrote, quote, the record in this case makes clear that Mr. Wallace's grand jury was improperly chosen in violation of the 14th Amendment's guarantee of the equal protection of the laws, and that the Louisiana courts, when presented with the opportunity to correct this error, failed to do so, Judge Jackson wrote. He added, quote, our Constitution requires this result even where, as here, it means overturning Mr. Wallace's conviction nearly 40 years after it was entered. So, George Kendall, can you talk about why it is that it was this particular aspect of the trial that the judge chose to emphasize, the absence of women from the grand jury?
There were several very strong claims in this case, and I think Judge Jackson this was so straightforward and clear that the law required him to grant habeas relief on this. He took this issue. And it also showed, if you read the opinion, that Herman had determinedly, on his own, tried to litigate this issue before the Louisiana state courts for decades. I mean, cited new cases when they came down, put the record facts in, and there were 2 or 3 judges in the state process as his appeals went through that said, you know, we need to grant relief in this case, but they never had the majority during this time. So it was no secret that there were profound problems with this case, but it's tragic that it took 4 decades for him to get a new trial.
What does this mean for Albert Woodfox?
Albert has three times had his case overturned. Last year, Judge Brady, also in the Middle District of Louisiana, overturned his conviction for a second time.
Together?
They were not tried together, tried separately. But Albert won on a racial discrimination in the grand jury composition in his case. His case now is up on the state's appeal to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So the Fifth Circuit wants to overturn Judge Brady's grant of a new trial.
What's very interesting is that in this case, the widow of the prison guard who was murdered in 1972, Teenie Verrett, she was just 17 at the time that her husband, Brent Miller, was stabbed to death. This is what she had to say in the documentary In the Land of the Free.
I've been living this for 36 years. There's not a year that goes by that I don't have to relive this. And it just keeps going and going. And then these men, I mean, if they did not do this, and I believe that they didn't, they have been living a nightmare for 36 years.
That was Teenie Verrett, the widow of the prison guard who was murdered. So let's be clear, George Kendall. Albert Woodfox and Herman Wallace went to jail for robbery.
Correct.
It was in jail in the prison that they were accused of murder, and for which they have served longer on death row, on solitary confinement consecutively. You know, I said death row, but for a lot of that time, they're actually on the row.
That's correct.
Than any prisoner in U.S. history.
We have found that there's no prisoners who've been locked up for 4 decades in a cell 23 hours a day, the way they have. In some of those days, they did not get out at all. Other days, they got out for 15 minutes at a time. We have a separate lawsuit that will go to trial in Baton Rouge in June that seeks an injunction and damages for all the time that they have wrongly been housed in solitary confinement in Louisiana.
And what about the litigation that challenges Mr. Herman Wallace's unconstitutional confinement? That's likely to continue. Could you say a little about that?
Yes, that is a lawsuit that Mr. King is involved in and Mr. Woodfox. That case involves violations of the Cruel and Unusual Punishment Clause because they've been held in cells for so long without any justification, and the 14th Amendment. That case is set to go to trial in Baton Rouge in June of next year.
I want to go... Oh, go ahead.
And I also want to mention Albert Woodfox. You said that he has just recently again been subjected to anal searches every time he leaves his cell, whether it's just to walk down the tier to take a shower. Albert, 30 years ago, on his own, filed a lawsuit and won a lawsuit that prohibited the Department of Corrections from engaging in those kind of searches. And we called that to the attention of the Corrections Department when they started doing it again. They said, we're going to continue to do it. We filed yesterday in federal court in Baton Rouge a lawsuit seeking an injunction barring the Department of Corrections from using that kind of search on Mr. Woodfox and others in that cell block.
The judge who issued the order that he should not be strip searched like this, anal cavity, oral cavity strip searched, died.
That's correct.
Right afterwards, they resumed?
That's correct.
Doesn't a judge's word carry on beyond his life?
We think that the Department of Corrections is going to find out that it does. We are optimistic that Judge Brady is going to tell the Department of Corrections, you cannot do this, stop.
I mean, on what basis were these three subjected to such extraordinarily punitive measures in prison, and on what basis was that justified for decades?
They were perceived in 1972 as black militants. At the time, the investigation into the tragedy of Brent Miller's death went off the rails by racist Louisiana prison officials.
And yet, as we've heard, his own widow did not believe these men did it.
That's correct. There is a bloody fingerprint. Whoever committed that crime left a bloody fingerprint. It is not Herman Wallace's. It is not Albert Woodfox. It's not anyone who was charged with that crime.
Robert King wasn't even in the prison at the time.
He was not even in the prison at the time. These men, over the years, despite being locked up, have helped numerous other inmates on those tiers in many ways. I have another client at that institution who got there at the age of 17 and would never have survived. It was the bloodiest prison in America at the time. And he, to this day, said, I would never have survived Angola in the 70s but for the wise counsel and love I received from Herman Wallace and Albert Woodfox.
Robert King, could you talk about that? The philosophy of the Black Panther chapter in the prison where you were, the preaching against the violence and the racism.
Yes, well, it was the philosophy was, and the idea was to bring some type of consciousness to the prisoner. There were 17, as George pointed out. There were Angola was considered the bloodiest prison in the nation, and there were 17. It was a slave plantation. There were 17 hour works every day, and especially during can season, sometimes longer. Men were working, going into the fields without boots or raincoat, without being fed adequately. The Albert and Herman and other members of the Black Panther Party decided to bring this knowledge to prisoners that they still have a right. They were human beings, and this was the teaching of the Black Panther Party ideology. You know, that we were protected by due process, 14th Amendment, and other constitutional grounds, and we adhered to that. Of course, the prison tried to discourage us and pose punitive measures upon us for doing this, but we continued to do so, and we were successful. Herman and Albert was very, very successful, along with other people who also organized with them, and as a result, they have paid dearly for because people, as George pointed out, and other prisoners point out, that during that time it was a dire period in prison. In Herman and Albert, there were numerous rapes that were going on and that were being allowed by the prison officials. Inmate guards ran the prison. They were the backbone of security in prison. They sold younger prison to older inmates for sexual purposes and so forth. And this was something that while the Black Panther Party and members were not homophobic or anything like this, but to be in a situation where you were forced into this type of activity was something that we frowned on. And even if we had not been members of the Black Panther Party, we still would have frowned upon this, because it was a dehumanizing practices, a dehumanizing environment. And we felt the need, and when I was into prison and I joined Herman and Albert, having the same ideology and being a member of the Black Panther Party and being a struggler, because I felt the need to struggle. I joined them. I willingly I joined their efforts to kind of combat some of the stuff that was going on. And as a result, like I say, we were successful. And as a result, Herman and Albert has paid dearly for it. More than 40 years in solitary confinement, convicted for a crime that is, for the most part, questionable, in which all the evidence has been undermined, where actual, not just factual innocence exists, but actual innocence also exists. The facts adduced does not, it does not suggest that the trial was fair. The conviction was fair, and then there are actual innocence. That George pointed out, there was a bloody fingerprint that was perhaps left by the person who committed the crime that didn't match any of the people who were subsequently charged. But nevertheless, they were charged with this, and so they have paid dearly. And I think the state recognized this. The state refused to recognize it openly, but I think in time they will recognize it. And I think with the support that we have around the world, have garnered around the world, with the legions of supporters, I think they will continue to keep this out into the public, this case and cases like this in the public, and it won't be forgotten.